Welcome everyone to the Xojo webinar. I'm Paul Lefevre, the Xojo Developer Evangelist, and our topic this time is Microsoft Office Automation. So what does Microsoft Office Automation do? Well, it lets you control Microsoft Office, but only on Microsoft Windows. Unfortunately, this series of protocols and whatnot does not work on Mac. And of course, Office is not available on Linux, so it's kind of a non-starter there. So all the stuff we're going to talk about today only works on Microsoft Windows. You can control 3 of the packages that are included in Microsoft Office. That is Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. And it uses the Microsoft Office object model. Now, this is the same object model that you would use if you were coding using Visual Basic for applications in any of those packages. So essentially the framework, the Office object model is the framework, and that's what you're going to use. It has all the classes and whatnot that allow you to communicate and control the various aspects of these 3 apps. Now, by default, this is not enabled with Xojo. You have to add the MS Office Automation plugin, and it is included with Xojo. It's in the Extras Office Automation folder, but you actually have to manually copy it from there to the plugins folder of Xojo, and then you're going to have to restart Xojo if it happened to already be running so that it loads up Office Automation. We don't include it by default because it does add some overhead pulling in all the classes and references to the Office object model. And if you're not using Office Automation, you really don't need all that cluttering up the autocomplete in the code editor and other stuff. So it's only there. It only needs to be added if you actually want to work with it. And a lot of what I'll be covering here in this webinar, you can also read about on the Dev Center here at this page here, the Office Automation Overview page. Let's jump right in. So first, Word. When you have the plugin in place, you'll have access to the Word application class. You'll also have access to the Office module, and you'll have access to all of the Word object model classes. Now, these are a long list of classes. They're going to appear with the prefix Word. Surprise. And this is just a list of some of them. This is the autocomplete menu that you can see in the Xojo code editor. And you can see with the scroll bar there that there's a lot more than what fit here on the screen. But these are all the object model classes for Word. And they're now available for you to use to control and get information from Word. Similarly with Excel, you'll get an Excel application class, same Office module, and all the Excel classes will have an Excel prefix. Again, there's a lot of them. And with PowerPoint, same thing. The class is called PowerPoint Application Class. Office module is still available. And the classes all have the PowerPoint prefix. And again, you can see even more PowerPoint classes apparently. So if you're working with Office Automation, you'll probably come across or maybe have used or even find examples on the internet of Visual Basic for application code. And I'm going to go through a few of the differences and between that and Xojo code so you can see how similar and how things are similar, how things are different. So first of all, there's no implied application instance that you get with Xojo. You have to create an instance of either Word application or Excel application or PowerPoint application. As shown before, all those classes have prefixes, Excel, PowerPoint, and Word. All the constants that give you access to various settings like alignment or other things are all inside the Office module. If there's collection objects, you cannot use for each to loop through them. You have to just use a regular for loop. Named parameter support is a bit trickier with Xojo. And some of the keywords are going to conflict with method names, but there is a way around that. But these are just things to keep in mind. One nice thing Xojo has is better exception handling with the ability to catch exceptions, so that allows you to structure your code a little better. So on a high level, this is some VBA code. This is a very simple code here. This is just adding a slide, or adding a presentation to PowerPoint and then adding a slide to it. And this is what the companion Xojo code looks like. And you can see that, it's pretty much the same. It's just some of the class names and keyword names, or class names, had to be tweaked a little bit. So you can see here, you had to create a new PowerPoint application instance. So that's in the PowerPoint variable. And then rather than the class just being called presentation in VBA, it's called PowerPoint presentation in Xojo. And the same with the slide class in VBA is called PowerPoint slide. But the method is still the same. You call the presentations.add method to add the slide. And then you can access the slides collection, I guess that is, and call its add method to add a slide to it. And you can see the constant there, pp layout text, is in the Office module, so you have to prefix it with Office. So it's not drastically different, but that's the sort of thing you tend to have to look at. If you have collection objects in VBA code that you need to tweak, so it might look like this. You're using for each in VBA. You just have to modify that to use a regular for loop going through the count. And all the collection stuff in VBA has a count property, so it's pretty straightforward to work through it this way. But slight little change of code there. Passing parameters by name is probably the most different thing compared to VBA and Xojo. So you can see the VBA code here. Got all kinds of settings using a with command. And this code, when converted to Xojo, as you can see at the bottom, you have to do a little bit trickier lookup. You have to create the new OLE parameter and then set a constant, and then you actually have to find the position of the parameter and set it manually. So you actually have to dig through the docs a little bit more to set things up the way you want. So a little bit more of a pain if you have a lot of this sort of thing to deal with. And conflicting keywords, I had mentioned before. Sometimes there's stuff in the Microsoft object model that uses a keyword, a Xojo keyword. And the simple way to just work around that is you just add an underscore to the end. So in the case of Xojo, select is a keyword, but you can just put an underscore at the end, and that will allow you to call that particular method without Xojo throwing up a compilation error. And lastly, catching errors in Xojo is pretty straightforward. You're just going to be catching the OLE exception. And you can do that, of course, using the exception keyword, which is just essentially one block for the entire method, and the exception would be at the end of the method. Or you can use try catch, which would probably be the better way to go. And then you can wrap individual blocks of code in their own exception handlers and check for exceptions that way. And you're definitely going to want to make sure you have your exception handling in place, because you're probably going to make mistakes setting up this stuff. And if you don't catch exceptions, as we all know, app's going to terminate. So this will let you catch the exception. You can display the message, so you get back a message from the Microsoft Object Model that'll tell you maybe what you set up incorrectly. And then you can maybe reference the docs again and correct the error. So it's pretty important to have that in place. All right, so now we're going to switch over to Xojo on Windows and take a look at some of the examples that show how this works. All right, so here I have Xojo running on Windows 10. And I've got 3 Office automation projects that Xojo ships with, and we're looking at the Word one right now. And I'm just going to run it first, and then we'll look at the code. All right, so I'm going to first click this button here. This will add the text that's here to a Word document. So it's going to start Word, and it did, but it started it behind, so we'll click on it here. So you can see it started Word and added that text to the document there. And I lost my second display, so let me reconnect that. All right, so it put the text into Word. That's great. So now we can use this option here, and this is going to do a find and replace within Word to swap out Mary with Judy, and you can see it did that. And then this here will allow us to do something like change the formatting of the text. So there, change it to center, or I could right align it. And you can see when I do that, it changes the toolbar control, because we're actually sending these commands right to Word. We're not like redoing the text in any way on Xojo and then pushing the text to Word. We're actually sending the specific commands to Word to do these things. So let's see what that code looks like. And you can see this code, pretty simple. Word document, sets everything to visible, setting some text to basically whatever is typed in there, setting the style, font size, and then, as I mentioned before, always having an exception handler at the end in case you've made some sort of mistake or Word doesn't like what you've sent it and it sends back an error. Your Xojo app will be able to catch it and at least show it to you so you can deal with it. The replace all code. A bit longer here. This is using that named parameter. It's essentially that named parameter code that I showed you earlier. And you can see here it actually has, it's making sure you have a document open first before it attempts to do search and replace. And then if it's not open, it'll just put up a message that says you need a document open. Now, very little of what you look at when you see this, all this setup coming in, is actual Xojo code. It's Xojo code, but it's calling the Microsoft Office object model stuff. So none of these commands or things are going to look familiar to you if you've never used Microsoft's object model for this sort of thing. And of course, none of this stuff is technically part of Xojo or documented by Xojo in any way. It's all Microsoft stuff. So you got to go to Microsoft's site to read up on their docs to understand what the commands are, what paragraphs is, and the fact that it is actually a one-based array of paragraphs in the document and has a bunch of properties that you can access. You can set them using different constants. So this code here is changing the alignment of the first paragraph that's in a document. And you can see here I'm checking that there is a document that's open, but I don't seem to have any code in here that's actually checking if there's a paragraph. So this probably would crash if I just ran it and didn't have any text in the Word in an active Word document. So that's for grins. We can try that. If I can actually figure out how to create a new document in these fancy new versions of Word. So I'm not exactly sure what we'll do in this particular case, but we have no text here, so theoretically there would be no first paragraph. But apparently that does not cause an error. I thought it might. But these are the sort of things that you may have to test when you build your app, or you'll have to dig and read the Microsoft Docs to see what it says about that sort of thing. If there's, in this particular case, I don't exactly know what it's doing, but it definitely didn't raise an exception. So there you go with that. And so that's 3 simple little examples of how you can use Office automation from Xojo. And now, we're using Microsoft Word. So let's take a look now at the Excel example. This one has a few other ones. We'll close off Word here. And we'll run this one. All right, so this first example here is going to create an Excel spreadsheet and just add this data to it and then put a formula at the end to total it. So you can see we've got the data here, added a new row for the total that sums up all the values. This one is going to create a chart. So it added a bunch of data and then generated a chart that just used the data to draw some type of rather not useful graph, or maybe the graph is useful, but because it's random data, it looks funky. And it also threw up these weird little graphics in here just to show you examples of things that you can do to control Excel. So pretty neat. And controlling both Word and Excel like this is pretty cool, because if you have a Windows-only app, or at least an app that is on Windows, you can use these 2 things to actually like generate reports. If you're making a business app, odds are people are going to be using Excel and Word and Office in general, probably in some manner. So you can just directly have your app spit data out to Office, to Word, to Excel, and then the user of your app can then go in there and maybe print a report from it, or have access to the data that they can manipulate or massage or do whatever they want with. And this might make things a little bit simpler for them, so you don't have to, say, export it to separate files that they then have to go and open in the app. And because you're communicating directly with Word and Excel, you have more control over the formatting and whatnot that you may not get if you were creating output files. This example is just outputting contents of an array. And this example shows you some of the specific features, so we can actually create a brand new blank workbook. I can change the sheet name here. It says sheet 1. I can change its name. I can type some text here. And I could change the font. I could pick another cell and set its text value. I can click on a cell and get the text that's in it. And I could delete the active sheet. Now if I click this now, I get an error from Excel. Cannot delete the only sheet in the workbook. And that's just a general kind of Excel rule, if you will. So there's only one sheet down here, so I can't just delete the last one. But if I add a second one, I can delete it, and then there'll be one left, so that's all good. So looking at the code for these, you can see the same initial setup. You have to create your new Excel application. And then add a workbook to it, set its name, plug in some data using the range method, and that uses the row column thing, where A for the columns, I guess, and then numbers for the rows, and then it's just setting the values that are in the list box. And then it's specifically adding a formula here at the end to sum up those values. You can see the formula right there. So it's just, creating this stuff manually and then just sending it over to Excel. So this code here at the bottom sets a chart, adds a chart, sets its type, sets which data it's pointing to, and then points it to where it should be in the spreadsheet. This example here shows you how you can send in a range of data in kind of just one command, which is a bit faster. So you just specify what the cell range is for the data, and then you pass it in, having set it up as a parameter with the specific type of the data you're passing in. You could have certainly, of course, done a for loop and added this, one cell at a time. That would work just fine, but this technique just kind of blasts it in there a little bit quicker, or maybe a lot quicker if you get a lot of data. And I won't necessarily go through all of these, but you can see small little code snippets for how you can do simple little things to your Excel spreadsheet. This is getting the currently selected cell value, so that's selection.value is how it's grabbing that. And then you can see here, this is actually checking if the count of sheets is greater than 1, and then deleting it, and if it's not, it's displaying the message. Now, if I weren't checking these counts and I just sent the delete message off, I'm pretty sure the OLE exception is what got raised. And in testing, that's where I figured that out, and they said, well, you know what, I can just add my own checks in here so that I don't actually raise an exception and do it the proper way. Which again is why having these exceptions is so handy as you're figuring stuff out with Office automation. All right, we'll switch over to PowerPoint, but let's close off Excel. And I'm mostly closing these because I don't think I allocated, I think I only allocated a couple gigs of memory to this VM. I don't want to push my luck by having the entire Office suite up and running. So this first one is just going to create a couple slides to a PowerPoint and then run it. And I think it just repeats back and forth between the first and second slide. So you can see it create a neat little PowerPoint. And this one will let us throw a picture in a PowerPoint, so let's grab a picture. And it just inserted the picture onto the slide of a new PowerPoint slide deck. And you can see you have a lot more things to set and properties available in PowerPoint, at least from what I could gather. So a few things here need to be set up, and then you can start the slideshow. As I was playing around with actually starting the slideshow, realize it's best to minimize the app that starts the slideshow, otherwise it kind of sits in front of the slideshow, which defeats the purpose. But you can see all the setup stuff there. And this doesn't do much other than just add the picture to the current slide. So it just sends it on in. And just using the path is what add picture takes. A lot of Windows stuff just likes to have the actual file path. And that's it. That's generally how you use this sort of thing from Xojo. Get in trouble with the closed messages. And if you take a quick jump over to the overview doc page, there's a couple of links here that are very useful, that essentially link to the Microsoft pages that provide additional links for how to get to the various documents and documentation they have for the object model. So you can see here, there's, if you have Office installed, looks like they have some help files or whatnot. And I thought, yes, they're here with the other links here. So there's other links down here. Matching up with Visual Basic is probably the easiest thing. So you can see there's some documents they have there on how to do that. So various things there. And then this other link goes to the Office Developer Docs, which have links to the object library. The language reference isn't as useful, but the object library is. And that's going to have a list of all the classes that are available to you and the methods that are on them and what parameters they take and all that sort of stuff. I don't know. Using this in conjunction with, examples you may find on the internet or stuff like that will help you port them over to Xojo so you can use them in your Xojo apps. So I mentioned this and showed you that page there. The examples we looked at today are included with Xojo. They're here in the platform-specific /Windows/Office Automation folder. And of course the Microsoft Docs that I mentioned as well. You can find links to those on the Dev Center page, but you're definitely going to want to refer to that stuff as you're coding up Office Automation stuff. There's a lot in the Office object model. And if you want more specifics on Xojo examples and how to interface Office with Xojo, there's a few books that are in the XDev library that would be a great place to go. There's Program Excel 2016 with Xojo, Program Excel 2010. I think the top book is just a newer version of the old one. I doubt there's a lot of differences. And then Program Word with Xojo in Windows. And all of these books are by Eugene Dakin. And they're very inexpensive. They're like $9 to $15 and totally worth it if you spend a lot of time working with Microsoft Office Automation. A lot of good material in there, a lot more examples. It's just definitely worthwhile and a great time saver if you find yourself having to use Microsoft Office Automation. And before we get to questions, I want to remind everyone that, of course, you can try Xojo yourself if you don't already have a license. It has a free demo with no time limit. And you can certainly play around on Windows and try out the Microsoft Office Automation stuff right from within Xojo in debug mode. Licenses start at $99. Always check out the Xojo Dev Center for the latest documentation, tutorials, and videos. And of course, Xojo Developer Conference 2016 is in October 5th to 7th in Houston, Texas. You can find more information about that at our website, xojo.com/xdc. XDC is a great place to go to meet other people that use Xojo for all kinds of things. It's a great learning experience. You talk to other Xojo developers. Everyone always raves about it being an awesome way to get much better at Xojo. So take a look at that, see if that's something you want to do. So questions, let's see here. All right, Paul, not me, another Paul, is asking if support for Outlook automation functionality planned. Is it planned? I am not aware of any plans to add Outlook automation to Xojo as part of our plugin. So if that's something you're interested in, make sure that there's a feedback case for that. So you head over with feedback. You can search. If you find one, mark it as a favorite, add a comment for saying, hey, I'd really like this. I use it for such and such, and it would be helpful. If you don't see one, well, create one with the same thing so that we can get it reviewed and see if it makes sense to put on the engineering schedule. All right, Jost is asking, I was thinking of creating a web service running on a Windows machine for generating documents and pass these off to the user. Would that be a good idea? Well, I don't want to say if your ideas are good or bad, Jost, but this would work. It's doable. You could certainly have my understanding is you can have a web app that uses these classes to communicate with the Office apps. But I mean, your server is going to, it's going to need to be configured so they can run the Office apps. I mean, obviously, all these apps, have user interfaces, so that you'll need to make sure that they can be run on the server. That's probably the trickiest thing. But then at that point, you ought to be able to communicate with the app, but you're going to have to save any documents down to files before you can send them back to the user. The user will not be able to interact with Office in any way from a web app. They wouldn't see it or anything like that. Let's see, James is asking, or Jim, it says James on here, but you might prefer I call him Jim. Is the lack of Mac support due to Microsoft not supporting it or a lack of a proper Xojo plugin? And he's asking the lack of Mac support with Office on Mac. And that, from my understanding, is a Microsoft thing. They have not implemented the OLE communication stuff on the Mac side. So there's just no way to do it. I think, if I remember my Office history, and I may be getting some of that wrong, but I don't even know what level of VBA support they have on Office Mac at this point. But it was supported, I think, in OS 9 maybe, and maybe the first OS 10 version that was kind of Carbonish, but I think they kind of yanked it a while ago. But yeah, at this point, it's not something we can just add to the plugin. Microsoft needs to decide that it's something that they feel is necessary to add. All right, let me just mark these off here. And Paul, the other Paul, has a follow-up. Do you know if there's any information docs available for using Office apps in an Office 365 environment? Now, I haven't worked with that, so offhand, I don't know of anything specific. I mean, certainly starting at the Microsoft site for that stuff to see if any of that is different than working with this when it's not Office 365 would be the place to start. But offhand, I really don't know. The version of Office that I have here on Windows 10 is older. It's, I think it was Office 2013. And I got to admit, I don't personally use Office all that much, so I don't even know what the current version is. There might be a 2016 version that came out this year, but so I'm not really up on all the Office lingo, but that would definitely be the place to start. And yes, Paul confirms 2016 appears to be the current version of Office. And Paul is thinking about possibly integrating maybe with OneDrive in some manner. Yeah, I'm not familiar with OneDrive to know what their APIs or anything are like that for integration. I do know that some Xojo developers on the forum have found ways to integrate things like Dropbox with Xojo. So if OneDrive has an API that, is similar to that sort of thing, maybe a REST API or something like that, then it ought to be fully doable in Xojo, but offhand I really don't know what they provide. And Jost has a comment that just says that the MBS plugins have, and really, if you think about it, what doesn't the MBS plugins have? But the MBS plugins does have a way to generate Excel documents without actually needing Excel, which can be useful as well. And if those things work on a Mac, then that does give you the ability to create a document that someone could open on Mac versions of Office. All right, well, I think that has reached the end of our presentation. So I want to thank everyone for attending the Xojo webinar. Have a great day.